The Tranq. The Tranq's my pro model board. This is the 7th iteration of Tranq. The previous 6 generations of Tranq I designed with Adrian Roper from Axis Kiteboards. Adrian's a super knowledgeable guy. He has a lot of information about hydrodynamics, about how flex and contours and construction, layups, how they affect the overall performance of the board. And I was super grateful to work with him on those previous 6 generations and glean all that great information. I used a lot of what we learnt along the way at Axis, designing the Tranqs on this 7th generation. And it's really not a huge step away from what I was doing already. It's along a similar timeline. And all I've really done with this Tranq is clean things up a little and make it a little bit more performance orientated. The Tranq was really the first performance board available on the market that came in bigger sizing. Typically boards really only coming in 142 or 143 as the biggest sizing, but we brought the Tranq out in that 146. I mean, a good 2 or 3 years before anyone brought out something bigger for a park or a freestyle board. So that's always been part of the philosophy with the Tranq, is having those bigger sizes available for people that want it. And you might be thinking, why do I want a bigger board? What's that going to do for me? Is there any point to having a bigger board? And the answer to that is really a bigger board is just going to give you a more efficient platform if you want something that has a more mellow and easier ride. So basically you can have more rocker height, but your board will have less curve and will induce less drag because of that. So for example, if this 155 has 2.7 inches or say 7.2 centimeter rocker height, the curve across the board is going to be a lot more mellow than if you'd had that 7.2 centimeters of rocker on a 142. A lot of people shy away from rocker because they think it's draggy. They've heard from people, yeah, you don't want to have rocker, you're not going to be able to go upwind. They've maybe ridden a wakeboard that had a really aggressive rocker line, maybe a 3-stage or some kind of hybrid rocker that really isn't so beneficial in going upwind. But I have to say that having a bigger board, you can really have a more aggressive rocker line, and you're not going to struggle to go upwind because that curve is just far more mellow. I personally really enjoy the feeling of a longer board. I also enjoy just having more tip and tail to play with. It's something that's more akin to riding a snowboard where you have, that tip and tail out there to butter and press and play on. But it can also just feel really good underfoot for landing and just having that solid platform to land on when you come down. You don't feel like you have to be super back foot heavy or you're going to nosedive. You can land with a more centered stance, which overall I also think is probably more healthy for your body because you're going to be using both of your knees and your legs and your hips and being more central over the board and absorbing those impacts versus having to be super back foot heavy, which is putting a lot of pressure on one hip or one knee or one ankle. And we can see that over the years, people often get injured like that. They're landing hard, they're hurting their ankle, they're doing an ACL, or they're hurting their hip or their back or whatever else. So I think, yeah, a bigger, longer board really has a lot of benefits for pretty much all styles of people on the water, from park to freestyle to even just your average everyday cruiser. Where it might not be super beneficial is for those big air people that are riding in a lot of wind, that just want a shorter board so they have less surface area to really load up a board and load up the kite and ping and get a lot of height in jumps. But that said, you can also get the Tranq in the smaller sizings, which are also narrower. So those are going to be good for anyone that wants a smaller board for big air or just riding in high winds, 35 knots plus. The Tranq also is a bit narrower than previous generations of Tranq. As you can see here, the width of the 6th generation Tranq in the tips and in the belly, and the 5th and the 4th generation Tranq is just a lot wider overall. This Tranq's got a lot more curve in its outline and a narrower tip shape overall. And that's also conducive to riding a bigger size board. I did that because I wanted the 155 and I wanted the 149 foremost to feel like smaller sizings. I didn't want people to get on the 149 and just feel like it was cumbersome. I wanted them to get on a 149 and feel that it had a bit more length, but at the same time, edging the board and going into tricks and landing was going to feel similar to that 142 to 145 range that a lot of freestylers are already used to. So part of making the board narrow was really just making a board that can be ridden longer, but still feels a lot like a shorter board. And that's really where the Tranq shines, I think. You can ride a much longer size than you typically would, but it doesn't feel cumbersome or overall big like a 155 school board or something would. That's one thing I really think a lot of people have struggled with over the years is when I say this board's available in a 155 and a 149, people are scared because they've ridden maybe light wind boards or school boards in those sizings and they really didn't like it because those boards are just flat doors most of the time. They don't ride well, they're not tuned for performance. But with something like the Tranq that's really been tuned specifically for riding in a longer size but maintaining that performance, you're not going to have those problems. So my suggestion is just try one out if you can. Maybe there's another board from another manufacturer you can try out that's a more performance, longer size board. I think everyone should really just give bigger size boards a go, and I think they're going to have a lot more fun on the water. They're going to be working the kite less, they're going to be cruising around more, and they're just going to be getting out there and not being so annoyed by stopping and starting all the time like you do on those shorter, smaller boards. This 7th generation of Tranq, compared to the other Tranqs that you can see here, is just a little bit narrower into the tips. So what that does is gives you a little bit less swing weight. It gives you a board that has a little bit more flex into the tips and is just like a little bit more lively and snappy overall. Other than that, it's a very similar board. It has pretty much the same bottom features as we had on the 6th generation Tranq, which is a central concave, a tunnel concave. This one's 3 millimeters deep. The 6th generation Tranq had a 4 millimeter deep in the tip to 2 millimeter deep in the middle, but I felt like keeping that 3 millimeter deep consistently across the board was just maybe a little bit more hydrodynamic approach. Other than that, you've got the heel side and the toe side channels. These are the channels, in my opinion, that do the most work on any board. This is if you have a channel where you want to put it, because I think this gives you the most grip. A lot of boards on the market nowadays, you're going to see having a crazy amount of channels in the tip, or just a lot of like concaves and other things that I feel are just unnecessary. If you want grip in the tip of your board, just ride bigger fins. There's no need to put 4 or 5 channels in the tip of a board and then put some fins on top of that. All you're doing is adding drag and reducing the flex and reducing the way the board can naturally bend in the tip. If you're putting all those channels in there, the idea is probably that you're going to ride finless. I mean, I don't really see another reason for putting heavily channeled tips unless you're going to ride finless. But the majority of kiters on the market, they never ride finless. They ride, 3 to 5 centimeter fins that the brands give them, and that's pretty much it. So with the Tranq, my philosophy is keeping those tips clean, so you're getting a faster board. You don't have the drag from those channels. If you want fins, you want more grip, you can put them on. Choose your level of grip that you desire. I'm not going to lock you in by putting massive channels in the tips that you can't take away and reduce the flex and playfulness. I think the Tranq now is the most performance-oriented board in the lineup. If you're looking for a traditional shape that can really do it all, it's good in the park, it's good at freestyle. You can even ride the smaller sizes for big air because they've got that nice narrower shape. Then the Tranq is your go-to weapon. I really enjoy the Tranq as a park board and a freestyle board, and it's really noticeable to me how light and lively and snappy it feels compared to a lot of other boards on the market. And that's partly due to the way the board is tapered into the tips. So you can see it doesn't maintain its mid thickness the whole way through. It tapers out into a pretty nice thin tip, so you're reducing weight there. You're also reducing some weight from having that central concave that's taking out a bit of the core of the board, and that even the heel and the toe side channels also taking out a little bit of the core and reducing weight a little bit. In my opinion, the Tranq's almost the perfect weight really as a kiteboard. As a wakeboard, it's on the light side. It's probably in line with the lighter wakeboards on the market. But as a kiteboard, it's about a mid-weight at that 3.6 kind of kg in the 155. And I think that's a really good match for most of the boots that people ride on the market. And if you're riding straps, that's also going to still feel great at that weight. The Tranq has, like all the other boards in the lineup, it's got that full wood CNC'd core, and that core is CNC'd to each size. So each of the sizes has their own mold and their own CNC file. So you've got the correct taper into the tips per size. So you maintain that flex into the tips. When you're making a shorter board, it's still got taper where it's tapering out to this thinnest point, about the same amount for each of the sizes. A lot of boards on the market, they don't do that. A lot of brands will simply have one CNC file and one mold that they're going to make the board from. And when they're making that shorter size, it would just be like taking this 155 and just chopping the tip shorter and shorter, which, I mean, in theory, it's fine. You're going to save some time and save some hassle. You're going to save some money as well because you don't have to make new molds. You only need one mold for all the sizes. But what you're lacking by doing that is when you get down to those smaller sizes, you've got a board that doesn't taper out as thin. So the smaller sizes would be stiffer and the bigger sizes would be more flexy, which is almost the opposite of what you would want in a board. Typically, you would want bigger sizes being stiffer and smaller sizes being more flexy for lighter riders. But with the Tranq and with all the OASI boards, you don't have to worry about that. We have CNC files and molds for every single size. Also, don't forget, you've got that Ptex slider base, full sintered base, super durable. This is a brand newie. I haven't ridden this one, but I've ridden that white one there a ton, and I rode the one I had before this a ton, and I gave it to someone else to ride, and they're still riding it. So you don't have to worry about that. You can ride in the park, ride up the beach, ride over rocks, anything you want to do. It's basically going to be fine unless you're hitting a rusty hook or some nails or just some sketchy beat up slider that rips your board open. But normal wear and tear, you're going to be able to ride this board for many years, and that's really what I enjoy because I really like to keep riding one board. I don't like to switch it up. I don't like to get a new board all the time, even though I probably could. I think it's just a bit wasteful. If you're wondering about the white Tranq, what's the difference with that? Right now, there's no difference with the white Tranq. It's just a more limited alternative graphic option. In the future, obviously, I make whatever changes I can to update the design and make hopefully a better board. But for now, that white Tranq is just exactly the same as the board you see here. It's just a different graphic option. I hope that's been informative. I hope you've got some information about the Tranq, and if you have any questions about the board or any of the other OASI boards on the market, just hit me up in the comments or hit me up on Instagram or Facebook. I'm happy to answer any of your questions, and I hope you have fun out there. Peace.